Well, good afternoon, everyone but Alaska and Hawaii. My name is Jake Milstein. Welcome to our webinar, How to Spend on the Security When the Economy is Down. And the funny thing, of course, is I just said good afternoon everywhere but Alaska or Hawaii and just looked at the folks who are here in the list. And the first person I saw is in Alaska. So good morning to you, sir. Um, as somebody who has run a business, when the economy is up and when the economy is down, I have to tell you, it is more fun to run a business when the economy is up. But that is not where we are now. Part of this is, of course, we could discuss why is the economy down? Is the economy really down? Is it, we could go into all of that. We're not going to. Part of what we're going to do today is we're going to say, okay, there is this sense that the economy is down. Boards, CEOs, chairmen, investors, people are acting like the economy is down. There are layoffs happening in the tech sector, but not so much in other sectors. But what we've seen is a contraction of spending, and that has impacted a lot of cybersecurity leaders. That's impacted IT managers, that's impacted CIOs, CISOs not getting everything they asked for, and it's creating problems. So we're going to put all the politics aside, and we're going to put all of the debate about is the economy awesome or not aside, and we're going to talk here about how to spend on security when the economy is down. Mike, next slide, please. Okay, a couple of very important things to know. Number one, there's a chat on the right. We love our community of people who come to our webinars. If you haven't been if you have not been to one before, welcome. If you have, then you know that the chat is sometimes very lively. My favorite thing to do is to take your questions and interrupt Mike and Fred with your questions. So put them in the chat and let us know. And I'd love for you all to go in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. Our most distant person who's joined a webinar this year so far was New Zealand. And so tell us if you're further away than that, although I guess that's Antarctica. All of you will get a recording of this, and you can mute the chat with a little, there's a little bell on the upper right. We will also send out the slide deck for this as a PDF. Mike, next slide. Okay, so who are we? If you don't know us, Critical Insight defends critical infrastructure against cyber attack. We work with cities, counties, hospitals, manufacturing facilities, all sorts of groups that keep society going. We help folks save lives. We help folks keep cities going. And we're mission focused to keep doing that by helping organizations prepare for a cyber attack, detect one quickly, and respond decisively when one happens. As we'll talk about later, you can do all the preparation, all the protection you want. We all know cyber attack can still happen, so you got to do detect and respond as well. Okay, Mike, next slide. So I'm the least interesting person on the webinar. My name is Jake Milstein. I run marketing and am the event host for our events. Mike Hamilton will do most of the speaking today. He and Fred founded the company. Mike is the CISO of the company. He's the former CISO of the city of Seattle. Fred is also founder of the company. He's currently our chief product officer. And so give Fred all of your product ideas. No, but Fred has a huge background in working with all sorts of organizations, preparing them for a cyber attack and responding to them and making sure that folks have great security postures. Mike, next slide.
Okay, I'm going to take
All
it
right,
away
Mike,
here.
this is what you do.
So what Jake failed to say in my bio part was that I report to Jake, as you can tell by all the next slide stuff. So here's an encapsulation of what we're faced with right now, or what a lot of business is faced with right now. So the macro econ is real bad, and that is affecting everyone's budget and therefore business spending. And when business spending doesn't happen, other businesses that depend on all that business spending stop spending. So it's this kind of self-fulfilling Mobius strip. At the same time, your information security, your cybersecurity is becoming extremely important as a competitive differentiator. And in fact, just to do business at all. There is regulation that has come from the federal government, generally directed towards the critical sectors, dams, water, finance, energy, etc. But it's going to trickle down to everyone. And so we're in a state now where it becomes very important to show your security papers annually to everyone you're doing business with. There are also shareholder expectations about how risk is going to be managed, especially in publicly traded organizations. The SEC is involved. They have mandatory incident reporting. CISA has instituted mandatory incident reporting for the critical sectors. The Federal Trade Commission is aggressively enforcing the False Claims Act, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So security is now table stakes for doing business. And at the same time, the bad guy population has exploded. Their tools, which have just been improved over time, are now very scary. They are very hard to detect. And for a lot of businesses, not only because of the cyber attack that they will endure and need to recover from, but from the class action suits that follow from the FTC and the False Claims Act, right? We said we were compliant with HIPAA, and then this thing happened, and the insurance company brought in the smoke jumpers with the Q-tips and the toothpicks to figure out what happened. And the Federal Trade Commission said, no, you weren't compliant with HIPAA like you said you were, so here's the fine. And then the lawyers say you have residents of California and their privacy has been impacted, and so here's a class action suit. And that becomes existential for a lot of organizations. Hospitals have closed because of this. So here's where we are. This is where we are. All right. Budgets are really bad. You have to do security, and bad guys are coming after you. All right. So your job is this: not only meet requirements if you are one of the in one of the regulated sectors, and a lot of you are. I know that even as we move forward, local government, as a matter of fact, your Treasury Department takes credit cards. That's the PCI data security standard. Your Human Services Department houses health records. That's HIPAA. You clearly have criminal justice information on the network, right? Well, that's the CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Services Standard. All right. So if you have requirements and or just stakeholder expectations, like I talked about, your shareholders, your customers, everybody, your business associates wants to see your security. Got to do that. You have to prepare your organization to be resilient. And what does that mean? It means you got to be able to take a punch and get up off the mat before the 10 count's over. Because if the 10 count happens, it was an existential event. So yes, you're going to need to prevent everything that you can prevent, but this mindset of we have to be ready to take a punch is the one that you need to have. And you need to do this with few resources because budgets are bad. You can't hire. Even if you could, the practitioners are in such short supply and so expensive, it just becomes a losing proposition to hire them because they don't stay around very long. And even if you train internal people up, train your IT staff up in security, eventually they learn enough security and they're going to go take another job and double that salary. Okay. These things happen. So this is the problem, and this is what you're faced with doing. Other panelists, any comments?
I want to say that the bad guys have their own economics that they're working under, and you kind of have to consider how they're being squeezed in different ways. So, with the apparent, even though ransomware is up, the payments are down this year, so their revenues are going down. They're going to find new ways to increase their attacks and use different approaches to get money out of you. So when their economy is down, they evolve with newer techniques, and you're going to, unfortunately, as they're getting better and evolving, your money is less. You have less money to spend. It's a real challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that's absolutely true, and again, I can say this as somebody who's run a business, Mike. If you go back a slide, that last thing that you had on there, which is do it with few resources, fewer resources, financial and human. Everybody always says, hey, keep up performance, but just do it with less, right? And we all recognize the futility in that, we recognize the irony in that, and we recognize the necessity in that. And so, I think part of what people are looking for is how can I do it more efficiently? What can I do without? which is why I'm really looking forward to one of the slides you have coming up in a little bit about, in security, what is, what's buy worthy versus what's buzzworthy. I know that's later in the presentation, but that's one that I'm really looking forward to.
Okay, so a war started in Ukraine, and supply chains have been impacted everywhere, partially as a result, partially also as a result of, oh, what was that thing? Oh, a pandemic. Um, Interest rates have to go up because inflation is high. And they have to, and this sounds absurd, but this is really the objective, they have to increase the unemployment rate, all right, in order for inflation to get under control. Banks are going belly up, mostly because people pass rumors around on Twitter and everybody freaks out. All right. All those are causing everybody's budget and business spending to be affected. All right. At the same time, again, attacks are up 7% in Q1. All right. As compared to last year. Interesting measurements that were taken that show 10% of corporations show DNS traffic being used as criminal command and control. That's real hard to ferret out. That's how sneaky things are getting, right? How evasive things are getting. I talked about the federal government coming out with the new requirements that will eventually percolate down to everyone. If you do business with a business and that business does business with the federal government, you are impacted. You are going to be under that same microscope. Coming up soon, what's happening with all the banks that have lots of their investments in commercial real estate? How many of you are not at an office right now? What's going to happen to commercial real estate, and what effect is that going to have on banks? All right. These all headwinds. Okay. I talked about the False Claims Act. I talked about the class action suit. We talked about the practitioners that are in short supply. So this is a bad condition here, right? There's things you have to do to stay in business. There's no money to do it, and bad guys are coming after you. So it's got to be done. You're going to have to budget for it. You're going to have to figure out, how are we going to manage risk and keep our business healthy to get through this downturn in a time when, criminals, as Fred said, their business is hurting too. So they're just going to become more aggressive. Okay. This is what Jake was talking about. So a fun game, if you've ever been to the RSA conference, is to take, a good sized water bottle, something, and fill it up with your alcoholic beverage of choice. And as you walk the vendor floor, which is the size of a city, pick out one of these buzz terms, and every time you see it in somebody's vendor booth, take a drink. You'll never make it out alive, because our business is all about buzzwords. It's what is the new thing that the venture capital companies will latch on to and fund a business to do because it's new and disruptive, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Okay, so let's kind of deconvolve these, and I invite my co-panelists to jump in here on these. So zero trust. Zero trust is not a thing you buy. Zero trust is a whole bunch of controls that manage your access to individual resources on a network based on your credentials, right? If you have authenticated yourself, where you are on Earth, what device you were using, and exactly what you want access to. And it's a whole lot of work to get this thing happening. So zero trust isn't a thing you can go out and buy. And you're going to see terms like, zero trust compliant. All right. It's like HIPAA compliance. No such thing. Collective defense. This is actually an interesting one, but you're going to have to really look at the claims that people are making about this, because in local, state and local government in particular, this is one that actually has some value. So, for example, running a state level SOC and using that to provide information back to local governments in the state, right? Setting up your own ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, getting together with other businesses in your geography and just sharing information through something called an ISAO, Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. This is an interesting thing, but if somebody's trying to sell you this, this is generally the kind of thing that of your own initiative and your own networking in your community that you put together. So if somebody's trying to sell you collective defense, look at them sideways.
Hey, and Mike, I want to stop and go back to zero trust, because
Sure.
Fred and I have had a lot of conversation around zero trust, and there are a number of reasons, but one of them is, I run a lot of our partnerships for Critical Insight, and I cannot tell you how many zero trust organizations have approached me and said, "Hey, will you resell our zero trust thing?" And Fred, in his role as chief product officer, has to take my call where I'm like, "Hey, Fred, what about this thing?" So Fred, you and I have had a lot of these conversations. Can you tell people about how you think about zero trust?
Yeah, if you really want to understand what does it mean to talk zero trust in a full architecture, go to the NIST. The NIST has a reference architecture for
That's right.
zero trust that explains it, and it is a massive set of controls, highly interoperable controls. This is something that, as Mike Sloan said, it's a journey. It is a journey. It is a set of tools that you probably are using. Many of them today, MFA, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on. These are all key components of zero trust. So look at zero trust as kind of a big, broad, kind of the Emerald City that the Yellow Brick Road leads you to. But you got to start building out each of the foundational components. 5 years down the line, eventually these will come together and you will be able to say, we have a zero trust architecture. But it is an exceedingly long journey, and you need to start. You probably already have started based on some of the technologies you're using today.
All right, Mike. I want to dig in on some of these, because as folks have fewer dollars to spend, you really got to figure out, okay, I can't just keep doing what I'm doing because the bad actors are getting better at what they do. So how do I, of the things that are on here, what's buzzworthy, what's buyworthy, and I think Fred's guidance there is really good. All right, you were on MSSP, I think.
Okay, so MSSP, Managed Security Service Provider. This right around 2000 was when the first MSSPs were coming up, and essentially, it's the 20th century version of what managed detection and response is. MSSP is the first kind of bite at that apple, where we will put a device on your network and it's going to hoover up all kinds of events going on, and it's going to send those events to analysts who will triage, investigate, and when something looks real, they will escalate. Well, escalate to MSSP means, well, we're going to call you, we're going to contact you. That has evolved into managed detection and really active response, so that at 3 a.m. Sunday morning, if an asset in your network starts to scan the network and that's never been part of its behavior before, an alert goes off because you're using, a good endpoint like CrowdStrike, Cylance, Defender, and the analysts get that and they investigate it and they go, oh, something's wrong here, so we're going to quarantine that asset until somebody can get to it on Monday morning, and that way you have contained the problem so that it doesn't spread and it doesn't turn into a house fire and ransomware and records disclosure and all the other stuff you want to avoid. So that's managed detection and response. There is also this alphabet soup coming out of cloud detection and response, data detection and response, identity detection and response, all this stuff. It's all very nascent. They're kind of leveraging that term detection and response and just applying it to everything. But, the fact of the matter is, managed detection and response should be monitoring your network, your endpoints, your cloud, rather than, individual things like this. It's I'm not sure why they're breaking it out like this. So that's a little dubious. That may be a buzz and not buy. And then there's managed cloud detection and response, data detection and response. Again, trying to co-opt something that really all belongs together and not broken out into separate pieces.
And Fred, you and I talk a lot about this, and in fact, I'll tell everybody, as a company that does SOC as a service, that does managed detection response, Fred and I have conversations all the time about, well, are we XDR? So, Fred, in your mind, what's the difference between all of those?
Yeah, well, I'll start out by saying last week I gave an hour presentation breaking down just these terms, and it took that long to really go through them. But the thing to understand is the term du jour is XDR. XDR means extended detection and response. It just means I'm not going to look at one source. I'm going to look at the network, the cloud, identities, O365, IoT, right? So that's XDR, and that is a product. XDR is a product. You buy an XDR product, these things send it to them. You operate it, really difficult to pull off. Managed XDR is essentially what we've always done, even though we still use the term MDR, because back in 2015, when Gartner first came out with the term, we were in the original market guide for that. And so we've stuck with that. But we've frankly been managed XDR company for 4 years since we started ingesting other sources beyond the network. So anything where it's MDR, NDR network, EDR, these are all detection and response technologies. They all need to report back into some system in which a set of managed analysts, people that you're paying to do this, are going to review this stuff. The real differences, for example, between MSP and MXDR, MSPs run the technology. They keep it patched. They send you maybe an alert. They don't do the investigations. They don't follow up. They can't do rapid quarantine. They're really kind of the low end. And it may be fine if you have the right staff on your side to pick up those tasks on your own. It may be appropriate. Most people, what you really want to hire is the hard to hire people, not the sysadmins, the people that are the analysts that actually make sense of the data. And that's why moving above and beyond an MSSP is probably, for the people on this call, a very strong suggestion, because the hard thing to do is the analyst component.
And Fred, in terms of people trying to figure out what to do when when the economy's down, when you have less budget, what's the right thing to do when you have less budget, and the price points of these things are different, I assume.
Yeah, so I would suggest that if you have a limited budget, you pick the data source or the environment, I should say, that you feel is most important to start monitoring. So if I am a hospital and I've got medical devices and I've got all sorts of on-prem facilities, I probably want to have network detection and response as one of the things, or the first thing I actually monitor, and then probably endpoint after that, then probably cloud, and then maybe other types of things. But if I'm entirely a web company and everything I have is in AWS, then it's entirely cloud monitoring. And then second to that would be the endpoints like EDR. So look at your environment, pick the ones that are most appropriate, and then eventually add the other environments into your monitoring scheme as you have money to do that.
I'm not sure how XDR got left off of here. Who created this presentation? Oh, right. Moving on. SOAR is actually kind of coming into its own here. So security orchestration, automation, and response. This is a system that you can have programmed to take an action based on an observed event. So we use it. I believe a lot of managed service providers use it in order to create efficiencies in a SOC operation. SOAR platforms are not easy to manage. They take a lot of care and feeding. I will once again remind everyone that at one time, Gartner asked all their customers, would you allow a piece of technology to take an action on your behalf without human oversight? And 100% of their customers said no. I believe that is changing. So SOAR platforms might be something to invest in. Passwordless authentication. So a means to verify a user's identity without the use of a password. So one-time passwords, a lot of possession factors. So for example, making sure, you've got a registered smartphone and you're getting a factor to that. Authenticating using your phone. Biometrics are going to become more prevalent. Anything we can do to get away from passwords, because too many of us, and I'm not including me in there, are gullible and give up passwords when people ask you to give up a password so that you can get a fake piece of information. All right. So attend our security awareness training every other Friday to avoid doing that. Moving on. This last one is, and by the way, if is passwordless authentication, it's going to be a lot to put that together. So if somebody's trying to sell you that, make sure you understand exactly what your role is going to be in managing and executing the project to roll all that out, because it's going to be some disruptive change. Now, cloud security posture management. A whole lot of data end up being stolen because people don't set up their virtual, private clouds properly, or in S3 buckets with no authentication on them at all. And so a service that scans your cloud properties looking for typical misconfigurations and other vulnerabilities, actually not a bad thing. Fred, I know you have opinions about this.
Yeah, so we look at this as as two ways of applying this. One is a one time coming in, doing an assessment, finding out what you have. But the reality is the cloud environments tend to change weekly, daily, sometimes.
Yeah.
They're rapidly evolving. So what you really need is a system or a service that actually goes out and looks at these like once a day and then reports back and says, did you know you just had a brand new S3 bucket you've exposed to the public? Did you know that you have went from 50 lambdas going off, all of a sudden there are 5,000 lambdas going off? And your head may say, well, certainly that's important because my cost just went up 10 times. But equally important is, how did it happen? Who did it? And is it the bad guys launching a crypto mining farm on my AWS? So, yeah, go ahead, Jay.
No, I thought you were done. I was going to say, there's one other thing on here, Mike, that I realized the maker of this slide didn't put on there, and that is ChatGPT and AI.
It's beyond the scope of this discussion. I mean, so look, AI is it's a component of things. It's not something you buy, right? So for example, if you have Microsoft Defender as your endpoint and you have a Microsoft E5 or G5 license, what that means is they've turned up their AI in the cloud so that and this is virtually indistinguishable from something we used to call UEBA, user and endpoint behavioral analysis. What it does is it develops a baseline of what you do, and then when you do something aberrational or your computer does it by itself, it throws off an alert. And because that AI is baked in there, that those alerts are of very high fidelity. Okay, so your computer has an antivirus agent on there. It's Defender. It's signature-based antivirus. Okay, so it misses something. All right, but then that something wakes up at night, starts to scan the network, and the cloud and the AI at Microsoft say, well, you've never done that before, so here comes an alert. And that lets an analyst get involved and get in front of that problem. So it's not something you buy. It's something that's just becoming baked into essentially everything we do. Sure, if you're talking about using ChatGPT as your first line analyst, no.
I mean, and yet I found an article that in the last 5 months, 200 new companies are calling themselves cybersecurity AI companies. So, in terms of buzzworthy versus buyworthy, yeah. I mean, if I'm seeing a bunch of IT directors and CIOs and CISOs on this list, if you're not getting emails now that say, hey, we're a new AI cybersecurity company, you will.
Oh,
yeah. That phone call.
The thing everybody has to understand, the back end technologies are, especially with all the large language models, Chat GPT like stuff coming out, that stuff does nothing to increase the back end capabilities. What it's enabling is for you to have a interactive chat like approach with the same technology you would be typing a command in otherwise, right? So maybe it's making it a little bit more accessible to lesser skilled people, and it probably lets us put together more complex queries and get answers quicker, but it is not revolutionizing the back end around detection. Although Mike talked about it, we've been doing what Mike's talked about for 5 years, right? With machine learning style stuff. So the stuff they're talking about now is really bolting on this interactive interface to it. If you're good at the technology, it's probably going to slow you down, frankly.
Yeah.
It's maybe good if you don't really know much about it and can help you learn.
And I think the take-home message here is next year, go to RSA, take your jug of Everclear, and look for AI, because you will not make it out alive. Moving on. Okay, so all of that. Here's what's going on, and here's the buzzwords, and here's some things that look like they're going to show some value. Boil all this down. everything needs to be 3 buckets because I report to marketing. So preparation, our are our preventive controls effective? Okay, this is a question that everybody needs to ask, because um, the way that we characteristically buy down risk is we put stuff in place to prevent. All right, and we want to know that those are effective. So if you take measurements on your network and you know what the rate of, for example, compromised assets that can be tracked back to the use of personal email, that might be something you want to check out, because I think you're going to find that's a pretty big driver of compromise. Are we meeting compliance expectations? And I use compliance and expectations in the same sentence. They're really a little different. Compliance means you're regulated and you have to do it. Expectations means in order to do business today, you are expected to be able to show your security papers. So in all your preparation, it's how are we prepared to demonstrate our security controls, whether or not you are actually audited against a regulatory requirement. Still got to be able to do that. And how good are we at preventing things from happening? Because when you budget for things and you're looking for what to buy, there's a choice between preventing to control the likelihood of a bad thing happening, and there's buying to manage impact, so that when something does happen, and it's not if, and it's when something does happen, you put out that little fire so fast that it's like a nothing happening. Okay. So detect, that's managing impact. Catch an attack fast, not necessarily an attack, because that's the background noise of the internet, but a compromise. That's what you want to catch quickly, right? And again, taking measurements, how many have we caught? Are our controls good enough? Is our monitoring good enough to, 3:30 in the morning on a Sunday, know that something is going wrong and make sure someone is alerted? And when that someone is alerted, do you have a response plan? Have you practiced it? Do you have measurements that indicate how good you do and where you need to improve? Because after an incident, and after even an exercised incident, it's all lessons learned. What do we do wrong? What do we need to do better? Oh, well, we didn't have somebody from finance at the table. We found out we were going to have to buy a bunch of stuff. We have an overdependence on one resource in our organization who is currently in Bolivia, right? And then insurance. Make sure what's covered by your insurance is what you really need to be covered, because a lot of times it will cover some of the costs of getting back together. It may cover the cost of actually paying a ransom. But today there is a long tail to these things. We talked about the False Claims Act. We talked about class action suits. So might want to review that insurance. So
And
boiling it down 3 buckets, here's what you get.
And so, Fred, you help organizations all the time figure out how to spend, on IT and security. If in a tight budget year where you're like, okay, I have this amount of money, how do you decide what to spend on, and how, what percentage of your spend should be on each bucket? And as Mike Sloan says in the chat here, alerting appears to be the key focus if you have limited cybersecurity funds.
Yeah, so that's definitely the $64,000 question, to use a money analogy. It's a matter of looking at what your risk is. I mean, there's no other really way to do it. And if you have particular risks that are existential, you have to address those first. Even if there are other things you may want, other things that are foundational, none of that matters if they're able to mow down your entire organization because you have something exposed that's a major risk. So you have to understand your risks, and then you have to knock them down one by one based on the risk is. So that's the same thing we've been saying for 25 years, longer, probably forever, frankly, that you have to do. And it becomes critically important in a down budget market, right? If you don't have budget, now this exercise, which we kind of take for granted maybe, is everything, right? You don't do that right, you're going to be wasting your money.
Okay.
I did want to point out quickly on the insurance thing. There was a ruling, critical ruling that came out, I think a week ago, about the Mondelez being a part of the attack from Russia, And the question was, would the cyber
Not
insurance
Petya.
pay out? Not Petya, right? Would the cyber insurance pay out because it was an act of war? Well, ironically, they ended up getting a payout, but it turns out they had a special policy that they didn't tell anybody about called a complete overriding general liability policy. That's the policy that paid off, not the cyber insurance policy.
Oh,
so
that's interesting.
Yeah, interesting twist that now we're back into an area where we don't really know what cyber insurance is going to cover until you have the incident and find out.
So Lloyd's, right, is the one that famously came up with that exclusion and said, we're not going to pay for it if this is an act of war, right? If this is collateral damage from war. And they went round and round. And first, it was in the United States, I believe, where they said, if you were the target, then that was an act of war. If you were collateral damage, too bad. And now the most recent ruling is that exclusion would only apply if the military was involved. So this whole act of war thing is even getting murkier.
Yeah.
And I mean, Fred, are there any savings to be had on cyber insurance?
Oh boy. Well, right now, so here's what I would suggest: that the only way you're going to get some relief on your premiums is by being able to prove to the insurance company that you have a robust program. And I know, in fact, there are a couple insurers out there that are really moving to we're going to assess you on a continuous basis. You want good low rates? We're going to put a device on your network. We're going to scan you continuously. We're going to run all sorts of dark web checks. We're going to constantly monitor you if you want the low insurance rate. So a number of new approaches starting to show up here, but currently the market's is retrenching. They went so over and paid out so much over the last couple of years. They've been losing money. So
Yeah.
nobody really knows where this is going.
And I'll add to that, so I ended up doing a bunch of work with insurance partners of ours, because obviously what happens is somebody has a breach, their insurance company then says, hey, you should use this IR provider. We are that IR provider. A lot of times I end up working with a lot of insurance companies. There are two providers out there, two insurance brokers, who I've recommended to our customers because I've seen them end up saving money. If they have some of our services, they've been able to bring down their premiums or at least keep them flat year to year. There's one healthcare organization that before they started working with us, they had a 360% jump in their cyber insurance premiums year to year. And so anyway, if folks need the name of those insurance brokers, let me know. I'm happy to help. All right, Mike, back to you.
Okay. So problems can be solved with people. Problems can be solved with technology, probably not all the way. Right? We talked about SOAR platforms getting better at what they do. So automation is getting close, but it doesn't work everywhere. It's really hard to automate something like quarantining a part of a network in a hospital, for example, or in an operational technology setting like a control room for a waste treatment plant, right? I mean, that stuff's just not going to work. In fact, it just exacerbates problems and makes things lots worse. The routine kinds of things that are in the safe parts of the network where, yeah, you might want to give the API command to quarantine an asset or even lock out a part of the network, that can work. But again, it takes a lot of human interaction. These things don't run themselves. So got to have somebody to work on that. And frankly, the people, especially cyber practitioners, they're expensive. They are incredibly short supply. They dictate the terms of their employment. They want to work remotely. They want to be highly paid. I will disclose that our analysts, because analyst burnout is a thing. Our analysts all work remotely, and they work 3 on, 4 off, and that's how we keep them from burning out, keep them motivated. But really, it's our mission focus that keeps their eyes on. Okay, so regardless, you still have to meet those expectations. And so somehow you got to have eyes on events because your prevention is going to fail. It is going to fail. no firewall for gullibility. Somebody's going to grab a USB stick they find in a bathroom or a parking lot and jack it in. They're going to run over a website that's been injected and booby trapped. They're going to click on something that got through or it came in their personal email. All right. So having eyes on to make sure you know when prevention fails to initiate a response process that everybody now wants to see. Show me your documented response process. Show me evidence that it's been practiced. You've done at least a tabletop exercise. And again, taking measurements to determine how effective you are, right? What was the time to incident close? What was the total, dollar cost for addressing that incident and bringing us back to operational capability? If you're doing it right, all right, when I say meeting those expectations and or regulatory requirements, there is stuff that you're supposed to be doing that you need to annual risk assessment, annual policy review. You need to do a tabletop exercise at a minimum. A functional exercise is even better. You need to do penetration testing. Your software development lifecycle, your system development lifecycle has to have gates in it that say security gets to weigh in here. They get to set requirements and they get to test for security. All that stuff is supposed to be happening. So can't do that with people you hire because they're in short supply and they all want to work remotely. And a lot of you just are bringing everybody back to the office. So again, the quandary is here. The mix of the technology that can automate as much of this as possible, and then the lightest human touch you can put in there, and frankly, the most reliable, because, I say this with some authority, cyber people are real flaky, and they will just keep changing their jobs every 6 months because they know they can, and they know that they can increase their salaries doing that. Okay. How to do
That's why is that why we gave you stock? So wait, go back 1 second, because I there is a case for hiring people.
That was
right?
1 second. Oh, sorry.
There are times when you should hire people, right, Fred?
Yeah.
Oh, of course. Again, my recommendation is to hire people that are going to handle the programmatic elements of your operation. So policy, incident response planning, maybe helping you do tabletop governance, exactly the day-to-day things. But it's really, I think, not useful to go out and hire highly specialized skill sets in your employees, because they're going to do that 3 months out of 12 months out of the year if you look collectively over the whole year. And then what are you going to do? You're going to be using them on things that maybe they don't like, things that they're not good at, things that they're not really interested in. So go out, outsource those types of things that are highly specialized, like pen testing. Do you really want to develop a world-class pen testing team internally, or go out and hire somebody for 2 weeks a year to go do it on your behalf? So again, think about the things that are specialized. Don't bring people in for that. Go for the generalist things, the things you need to keep your operation running.
Yeah, and we probably should have talked about interns and apprentices a little bit too, because a lot of these things can be done by people that are kind of passing through on their way to a career and need to get some real experience on their way. And so how to just look at these logs or do a policy review or give me a deck to do awareness training for executives or something like that. Interns can be a partial solution to the people problem. But, in terms of what Fred said, some of the specialized things, the analogy I use is a plumber. Yeah. So if you are in a building that gets a clogged toilet once a year, would you have a plumber on staff to handle that once a yearly thing? No. A penetration test is required once a year. Do you need somebody on staff with those skills? You probably do not.
I'd like to jump into about ChatGPT, since we're talking about it. It is useful in this sense. For example, if you need to, for example, we had this need. We said we need to develop config guides to open a span port to all traffic on a variety of about 20 switches. I went to ChatGPT. I said, create a config guide to open a span port, and listed the switches. I'll be darned if it didn't put out 20 configs that were virtually perfect for doing it. So that was a huge amount of busy work that I just pushed off to ChatGPT. It's not Doesn't take a genius, right? Just need somebody that could go reference the material, put it together in a form you can use. That's what you want to use those kind of tools for.
That is kind of genius. Okay, doing it wrong. So in order to do this wrong, buy all those buzzwords because they are marketing to you and because people respond to marketing because we're capitalists and that's how it works. Focus your budget asks on just preventing things. Keep this mindset. If we just invest enough, we'll be able to keep the bad guys out perfectly. No, you won't. No, you won't. All right. How to do it wrong? Let the insurance handle it. Well, you know what? The insurance might not even cover you if they find out that you didn't have, those demonstrable controls that I talked about. And in fact, insurance companies today have become kind of the universal regulators of everyone because if you want that insurance, you have to demonstrate your controls. All right. Doing it wrong, don't develop a response and recovery plan. And just kind of fly by the seat of your pants if it happens, right? We're only talking about a virus on a computer, right? That's all. No, that's not it. That virus on a computer turns into horrible, horrible things happening, stealing your records, encrypting your network, bringing fines and lawsuits down on you. And whatever you do, don't practice because you're probably just going to be able to grab that piece of paper and read it in real time and figure out how that works. All right. All of this is management by landmine. All of this is management, which, and I have some government friends here, and government in particular has this habit of managing by landmine. All right. Got to get in front of this stuff. If the driver, if shareholder and business associate expectations are insufficient, if regulatory requirements are insufficient to spur you to action, then you are probably going to be a victim and a bad statistic. So how do we do this the right way? All right. Alignment with a framework. Right. And we're beating on this subject every chance we get now, because as everybody goes into the second part of the year, we're going to be in budgeting season. For some of you, those are biennial budgets. But when you align your organization with a standard of practice, even if you're not regulated, the NIST framework was built for you. It is an outcome-based framework. It doesn't say have this specific control in place. It says make this thing happen. Remote access is managed. How you do that is up to you. So if you use the framework for your annual risk assessment, which you should be doing if you're doing it right, and you identify risks because you will see a control objective that is not met, and you ask yourself, what's the likelihood we could lose records or money or get knocked down because of that failure to meet that outcome, and then what would the impact of that be? So you've turned a missing control into actual risk, okay, with probability and impact, and then figure out what you're going to do with each one of those risks. Accept, avoid, mitigate through controls, or transfer. And if you're going to mitigate through controls, what's that going to cost? Are we going to deliver that internally? Are we going to hire consultants? Are we going to hire a managed service? Are we going to buy a capital product? Okay, so every one of the risks then ends up with here's what it's going to cost in terms of our own resources and money to fix that, to be able to meet that control objective. And then you take this and you have a corrective action plan that could run out for 2 years if you are biennially budgeting. You have a completed risk assessment, and you know what everything is going to cost. So this either goes into your budgeting process, or for a lot of local governments out there, it goes into a grant request, because we're just about to fire up the state and local cyber grant program. And all of your states have been working on their all of state plans, some better than others, but they're about to announce the availability of these grant applications. So here's how to come up with, here's what we need in a structured way that ticks off other things, like a completed risk assessment, like you're supposed to be doing. So we've modified a spreadsheet with all of the controls from the last version of the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? So that's identify, know what's on your network, right? Protect, have those preventive controls in place. Detect, monitor your network. Respond, which means have a plan and exercise it. And recover, how do you get back to full operational capability? What they're going to add in the next version is a governance section, because that's importantly missing from this. It's interspersed throughout there, especially in the identify bucket. But they're going to add a whole new focus area for governance. Regardless, if you use this tool that we use for our own risk assessment and our own budgeting, you can also set a maturity level that you'd like to hit, and it will tell you how you're doing against that maturity level and whether or not you improved or slid back from the preceding year's assessment. So you get a budget package, corrective action roadmap, completed risk assessment. It's done by the book. It's what the federal government gave us to use. You have papers to show. Everything's great. And I will just end on this.
So wait, before you go to that, go back one, Mike. I love interrupting Mike right at the end of a slide.
He does. That's why pencils are stuck in my eye routinely.
If anyone wants the spreadsheet and wants to chat with Mike about how it works, do me a favor, just shoot me an email and I'll hook you up with the spreadsheet and a meeting with Mike. Also, we'll send it out here.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Mike. Now you can keep going.
And a sharpened pencil if you need one.
Okay. So prioritizing all this, I touched on this. I want to put it in front of everybody so you see it. All right. Risk is the product of two things: the likelihood that a bad thing happens. What is a bad thing? You lose records, you lose money, you get knocked down. All right. And there's a bonus one as well. You could be used to attack your own business associates. All right. So those are the things that actually cost money, right? Nobody needs to worry about Russian cyber buffer overflow and all that stuff. It's what's going to happen where we lose money. So you're going to reduce the likelihood of that. You're going to buy down this risk, addressing the likelihood term with preventive controls. And for the most part, unless you're into buying the buzzwords, we pretty much have preventive controls in place. A lot of you still need multi-factor authentication. You need to do a better job training your users. Send them to our awareness training, please. But you've reduced that likelihood as much as you can. Now you've got to work with that impact term. Stuff is going to happen. All right. The impact can be the help desk cleaned up somebody's workstation. The impact can be the FBI just called and all of our customer records are for sale online and it's probably going to drive us out of business. And you get to pick which one of those applies to you and whether you prioritize monitoring, detection, response, and recovery, since you've pretty much already addressed all the things that you can do to reduce the likelihood of the thing happening in the first place. Okay, I hope that all made sense. And now, how much time we have? Got a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, if folks have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll ask. As people have put things in, I've asked them. But if anyone has anything else, let me know. I got a bunch of requests for the insurance help and the spreadsheet, so happy to answer those. Fred, I do. A few years ago, you said to me, hey, the world's going to move towards NIST CSF. That's not a surprise to you that the government is pushing everybody there.
No. Well, it's the only one that, as Mike said, it's outcome based. So being able to say to everything from a Fortune 500 company down to a mom and pop, here's what you do, being prescriptive is inappropriate, right? You have to say, here's what you want to happen, right? I want to have a vulnerability management program that identifies, prioritizes, and remediates vulnerability on a timely basis. How you do that, totally different for a small company it is for a large company. So it was built specifically to meet this need of one size fits all. And it is a very appropriate framework in that it takes things at a kind of let's say a 50,000 foot level, not 10,000, not 100,000, but kind of just right in the Goldilocks zone. So it always felt right. And it was essentially built for everyone. It was not specific to a particular industry like PCI or HIP or something like that.
Yep, for sure. All right. Yep. Mike, the other Mike in the chat says just ordered a new supply of Xanax. Thanks, Mike. Next slide, Mike Hamilton.
Do we have a next slide?
Is there a
We
next
do.
slide?
Oh,
Yeah, you have
there's
a next slide.
Okay. Oh,
You have
right,
this
right,
slide
right.
where I tell folks, hey, this
Who
is what
put
we
this
do.
deck together?
Apparently late at night.
It was-
So Mike, we help folks prepare and detect and respond to cyber attacks, and that means that we help with risk assessments, we help with technical testing, and if you need help with one of those new risk assessments, we can do that. The other thing that's come up a lot this year as people try to figure out how to spend their budget is some SME hours around, hey, how do I budget? How do I spend that? And my policy work has come up. And if you don't have managed detection response, if you don't have the detect, that's a really important thing, of course. And another place where people are saying, hey, this is my most important thing is monitoring, doing, managed detection response for 0365. Is the other thing that's come up a lot. Okay, on the bottom half of this slide, if you are not already signed up for Mike Hamilton's daily IT security blast, Mike has done it for the last 15 years. You can tell because the grammar is bad here, curated by myself for the last 15 years. He does that. And you can sign up for that on our website. Just go to criticalinsight.com and sign up there. Okay. Also, another way to save money, free security awareness training. We do it every other Friday. You can sign up on our website under events. Send all your folks. We're happy to give you a list of who came. And of course, all of these panels that we do regularly. Mike, next slide. And if you're looking to contact us, that's how you get Mike. That's how you get me. You can get Fred too, but hit me up and I'll book a meeting with Fred. He's very busy. But always happy.
I'm not busy, so don't even worry about that.
No, but we want to be able to help you, especially in these difficult budget times. All right, final thoughts, Fred.
It's all about prioritization. Got to look at your risks, prioritize them, knock down the most important ones.
Mike.
I agree with Fred. Watch out for snake oil and the self-fulfilling Mobius strip of venture capitalism coming up with new things to sell you.
Absolutely. All right. I love that Mobius strip thing. All right, everybody, if you have any questions, shoot me a note. And thanks for joining us. Really appreciate having you here. Now, one last thing before you leave, and that is at the end of all of our webinars, we have a survey, and we really love when people take the survey. Was this good? Was this helpful? Did you learn anything? Or, hey, was this one really off the mark? Let us know. We want to hear it. We love your feedback. The survey is in the chat there. And for every survey that gets taken, we give a donation to the Society for Information Management, which is a great organization that came to us through one of our customers. And they help educate information managers around the country. All right, everybody, please take the survey. We really appreciate it, and have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.